Okay, then. Welcome, everyone, to another. I'm supposed to enunciate, I've been told. If I speak up a bunch and use my voice, y'all can hear me better. It also sounds very dramatic. Dramatist. Welcome, you all, to week something of reading the lovely and wonderful book, A Wizard of Earthsea, by Ursula K. Guinn. The world's shortest recap is about to happen. Chapter 1, Warriors in the Mist, we were introduced to both the land of Earthsea, which is actually more sea than Earth, I think, and our protagonist, Ged, a young boy. Things happened. Through those things, we learned that Ged is, as has been said in other media, powerful in the ways of the Force. After going to live with a wizard, there was an encounter with a shadow loosed by an ill-fated reading of a spell. Then a said wizard, Guinn, said, "Look, bud, why don't you go to the school for the wizards? Might be a good thing for you. Look, I love you. I'd love you to have to stay here, but if you want to go over to the school of the wizards, I'll send you there. What do you get to say?" And what did he say? He said, "Frick yeah, I'm going to the school of the wizards. I'm going to learn how to be a badass freaking wizard. I'm going to kick everyone's ass because I'm like 14 and I'm freaking full of myself." Then he went to the school of the wizards and made some friends, or maybe at least one friend and maybe an enemy. And not really an enemy, they're just kind of at each other. And then, still showing off, had to show everyone how loud his truck was, zooming off the line around the corner. So he did a spell, and this shadow came back, but it was maybe a different shadow, and maybe it was worse, or maybe it was continuation of the old shadow. Hard to tell, but now there's a shadow in the world. Lots of bad things happened. Ged got all fucked up. The archmage died. The new archmage isn't sure he believes in him, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then Ged got done at school, got done being a wizard, went to this set of islands where life was kind of nice, and he made some friends, but then they weren't so happy that he let a young boy die, no fault of his own, really. But he couldn't save this boy, but he tried, and then the shadow came and found him, and that was bad. So then he went to hunt some dragons, which is kind of the whole reason for going there, and through much more cunning than force, dragon ass, and then dragons' asses were kicked, and then he was like, all right, what the heck do I do now? I should go back to Roke, baby, the island of the wizards, because maybe they'll keep me safe. But alas, no, it was awful hard to get there. So he went running, and he ran, and ended up on a boat, and crewed on a boat, and went to this land of Oskill, which is a pretty different land far in the north. And then this person that he doesn't sure he trusts is like, "Follow me, I'll take you where you're going." Ged's like, "Yeah, I don't know if that's really a good idea, but I don't have a lot of other options, so I guess I'll follow you." And they're walking, and it's cold, and it's dark, and it's snowing. And Ged asks repeatedly, "How far, Skior?" And then, as several times before, after a pause, the other answered without turning, "Not far." I call bullshit. But that's where we left off last week. Going back a paragraph or so here. The otak stirred in his pocket, and a little vague fear also woke and stirred in his mind. He forced to speak. Darkness comes, and snow. How far, Skior? After a pause, the other answered without turning. Far. But his voice sounded not like a man's voice, but like a beast, hoarse and lipless, that tries to speak. Ged stopped. All around stretched empty hills in the late dusk light. Sparse snow whirled a little falling. Skior, he said, and the other halted and turned. There was no face under the peaked hood. Before Ged could speak spell or summon power, the Gebeth spoke, saying in its hoarse voice, Ged. Then the young man could work no transformation, but was locked in his true being and must face the Gebeth thus defenseless. Nor could he summon any help in this alien land where nothing and no one was known to him and would come at his call. He stood alone with nothing between him and his enemy but the staff of yew-wood in his right hand. The thing that had devoured Skior's mind and possessed his flesh made the body take a step towards Ged. Excuse me. And the arms came groping out towards him. A rage of horror filled Ged, and he swung up and brought down his staff, whistling on the hood that hid the shadow face. Hood and cloak collapsed down nearly to the ground under that fierce blow, as if there was nothing in them but wind, and then writhing and flapping stood up again. The body of a Gebeth has been drained of true substance and is something like a shell or a vapor, an unreal flesh clothing the shadow which is real. So, jerking and billowing as if blown on the wind, the shadow spread its arms and came at Ged, trying to get hold of him as it had held him on Brook Knoll. And if it did, it would cast aside the husk of Skior and enter into Ged, devouring him out from within, owning him. Desire. Ged struck at it again with his heavy, smoking staff. But it came again, and he struck again, and then dropped the staff that blazed and smoldered, burning his hand. He backed away, then all at once turned and ran. He ran, and the Gebeth followed a pace behind him, unable to outrun him, yet never dropping behind. Ged never looked back. He ran through that vast dusk land. Once the Gebeth, in his hoarse whistling voice, called out again by name, but though it had taken his wizard's power thus, it had no over his body's strength and could not make him stop. Night thickened, and the hunter and the hunted. Night thickened about the hunter and the hunted, and snow blew fine across the path that Ged could no longer see. The pulse hammered in his eyes, the breath burned in his throat. He was no longer really running, but stumbling and staggering ahead, and yet the tireless pursuer seemed unable to catch up, coming always just behind him. It had begun to whisper and mumble at him, calling to him, and he knew that all his life that whisper had been in his ears, just under the threshold of hearing. But now he could hear it, and he must yield, he must give in, he must stop. Yet he labored, struggling up a long, dim slope. He thought there was a light somewhere before him, and he thought he heard a voice in front of him, somewhere calling, "Come, come!" He answered, but he had no voice. The pale light grew certain, shining through a gateway straight before him. He could see the wall, but he saw the gate. At the sight of it, he halted, and the Gebeth snatched at his cloak, sides, trying to catch hold of him. With the last strength in him, Ged plunged through that faint shining door. He tried to turn to shut it behind him against the Gebeth, but his legs would not hold him up. He staggered, reaching. Lights swam and flashed in his eyes. He felt himself falling, and he felt himself caught even as he fell, but his mind, spent, slid away into the dark. Chapter 7, The Hawk's Flight.
Hey, just it seems to be going out, in and out. So I don't know if your mic is kind of getting caught in your shirt, but just a heads up that we're getting it's spotty. It might just be tech, but
It being the audio.
Yeah, the audio is spotty.
I see. Well, it's not caught in my shirt because I ain't wearing a shirt.
Well, thank you for letting us know.
Yes.
I was out beyond my Wi-Fi range on my cellular network for a bit because I was taking a walk, and you dropped out really seriously on me. I thought maybe it was just been my network, but it might not have been.
Well, it could be my network or my tired laptop. So I can't do much about that without stopping for a few minutes here and switching to a different device, which I can do if we need to. But let's see if this gets any better. And let me make sure I'm on the right Wi-Fi.
You sounded good while you were saying all of that. It wasn't chopping up for
Right.
me.
Likewise.
All right. Well, let's keep going then. And chat. I didn't have the chat open now. That's what I paused at the beginning. You know, when we were switching chapters here to get the chat up. So I have the chat up now, and hopefully I can see if everyone tells me, and I can switch to my phone or something.
On an access note, when I screen share, I can't see the chat. So if people need my attention, you will have to shout out like I don't. If there's something I need to do to change the screen share or whatever.
Okay, duly noted. By me at least.
Okie doke. Thanks all.
Okay. Chapter 7, The Hawk's Flight. Ged woke, and for a long time he lay aware only that it was pleasant to wake, for he had not expected to wake again, and very pleasant to see light, the large, plain light of day all about him. He felt as if he were light, or drifting in a boat on very quiet waters. At last he made out that he was in bed, such bed as he had ever slept in. It was set up on a frame held by 4 tall carven legs, and the mattresses were great silk sacks of down, which is why he thought he was floating. And over it all, a crimson hung to keep out drafts. On 2 sides, the curtain was tied back, and Ged looked out at a room of walls of stone and floor of stone. 3 high windows, he saw the moorland, bare and snow-patched here and there in the mild sunlight of winter. The room must be high above the ground, for it looked a great way over the land. A coverlet filled satin slid aside as Ged and he saw himself clothed in a tunic of silk and cloth of silver like a lord. On a chair beside the bed, boots of glove leather and a cloak lined with Pahlawi fur were laid ready for him. He sat for a while, calm and dull as one under an enchantment, and then stood up, reaching for his staff. But he had no staff. His right hand, though it had been salved and bound, was burned on palm and fingers. Now he felt the pain of it and the soreness of all his body. He stood without moving a while again. Then he whispered, not aloud and not hopefully, Hoeg, Hoeg. For the little fierce loyal creature too was gone. The soul led him back from death's dominion. Had it still been with him last night when he was that last night ago? He did not know. It was all dim and obscure in his mind. The Gebeth, the burning staff, the running, the whistle, the gate, none of it came back clearly to him. Nothing even now was clear. He whispered his pet's name once more, but with answer, and tears rose in his eye. A little bell rang somewhere far. So I'm gathering we're still having bandwidth issues, or yes. So I'm noticing that, so we can do a couple of things here. I'm noticing the laptop is, which is not the best of days, is significantly more struggling when the screen share is active. So I wonder if that is what's here. So did that make an immediate difference for people when there's no screen share? Suddenly y'all can hear me better, or is it still choppy?
It's still a little choppy, maybe not quite as much, but it almost sounds like a little bit of static or something.
It's definitely, you've never had this kind of choppiness any of the other nights, and we've had screen share on. So my first inclination is it may not be too much related to the screen share.
I can send the link to the PDF for everybody. I found a free one if people just want to look at it on their individual ones. If we want to try that for a while and see if the sound improves.
Or I can switch to a different device. That's certainly also an option.
Yeah, how long is it going to take you to switch? And we could just hang out here and wait for you to switch. Wouldn't have to close the meeting.
Yeah, no, I hate to take time away from reading, but if the reading is not enjoyable to people, then we should do that. I mean, 5 minutes for me to find the link and open.
I think that's 5 minutes well spent.
I'll pause the recording.
Great. Okay, carrying. A coverlet of down-filled satin slid aside as Ged sat up, and he saw himself clothed in a tunic of silk and cloth of silver like a lord. On a chair beside the bed, boots of glove leather and a cloak lined with Pahlawi fur were laid ready for him. He sat a while, calm and dull as one under an enchantment, and then stood up, reaching for his staff, but he had no staff. His right hand, though it had been salved and bound, was burned on palm and fingers. Now he felt the pain of it and the soreness of all his body. He stood without moving a while again. Then he whispered, not aloud and not hopefully, Hoeg, Hoeg. For the little fierce loyal creature too was gone, the little silent soul that once had led him back from death's dominion. Had it still been with him last night when he ran? Was that last night? Was it many nights ago? He did not know. It was all dim and obscure in his mind. The Gebeth, the burning staff, the running, the whispering, the gate. None of it came back clearly to him. Nothing even now was clear. He whispered his pet's name once more, but without hope of answer, and tears rose in his eyes. A little bell rang somewhere far away. A second bell rang in a sweet jangle just outside the room. A door opened behind him, across the room, and a woman came in. "Welcome, Sparrowhawk," she said, smiling. She was young and tall, dressed in white and silver, with a net of silver crowning her hair that fell straight down like a fall of black water. Stiffly, Ged bowed. "You don't remember me, I think. Remember you, lady?" He had never seen a beautiful woman dressed to match her beauty but once in his life, that lady of O who had come with her lord to the Sun Return Festival at Roke. She had been like a slight, bright candle flame, but this woman was like the white new moon. "I thought you would not," she said, smiling, "but forgetful as you may be, you're welcome here as an old friend." "What place is this?" Ged asked, still stiff and slow-tongued. He found it hard to speak to her and hard to look away from her. The princely clothes he wore were strange to him. The stones he stood on were unfamiliar. The very air he breathed was alien. He was not himself, not the self he had been. "This keep is called the Court of the Terranon. My lord, who is called Benderesk, is sovereign of this land from the edge of the Kexamet moors north to the mountains of the mountains of Os, I think, and keeper of the precious stone called Terranon. As for myself, here in Oskill they call me Seret, silver in their language, and you, I know, are sometimes called Sparrowhawk, and were made wizard in the Isle of the Wise." Ged looked down at his burned hand and said presently, "I do not know what I am. I had a power once. I have lost it, I think." "No, you have not lost it, or only to regain it tenfold. You are safe here from what drove you here, my friend. There are mighty walls about this tower, and not all of them built of stone. Here you can rest, finding your strength again. Here you may also find a different strength, and a staff that will not burn to ashes in your hand. An evil way may lead to a good end, after all. Come with me now, and let me show you our domain." She spoke so sweetly that Ged hardly heard her. Excuse me. She spoke so sweetly that Ged hardly heard her words, moved by the promise of her voice alone. He followed her. His room was high up indeed in the tower that rose like a sharp tooth from its hilltop. Down winding stairs of marble he followed Seret, through rich rooms and halls, past high windows that looked north, west, south, east, over the low brown hills that went on, houseless and treeless and changeless, clear to the sun-washed winter sky. Only far to the north, small white peaks stood sharp against the blue, and southward one could guess the shining of the sea. Servants opened doors and stood aside for Ged and the lady. Pale, dour Oscillians they were all. She was light of skin, but unlike them, she spoke Hardic well, even, it seemed to Ged, with the accent of Gaunt. Later that day, she brought him before her husband, Benderesk, lord of the Terranon. Thrice her age, bone white, bone thin, with clouded eyes, Lord Benderesk greeted Ged with grim, cold courtesy, bidding him stay as guest however long he would. Then he had little more to say, asking Ged nothing of his voyages or of the enemy that had hunted him here. Nor had the lady Seret asked anything of these matters. If this was strange, it was only part of the strangeness of this place and of his presence in it. Ged's mind never seemed quite to clear. He could not see things plainly. He had come to this tower keep by chance, and yet the chance was all design. He had come by design, and yet all the design had merely chanced to come about. He had set out northwards. A stranger in Orome had told him to seek help here. An Oscilian ship had been waiting for him. Skior had guided him. How much of this was work of the shadow that hunted him? Or none of it? Had he and his hunter both been drawn here by some other power? He following that lure and the shadow following him, and seizing upon Skior for its weapon when the moment came? That must be it, for certainly the shadow was, as Sarah had said, barred from the court of the Terranon. He had felt no sign or threat of its lurking presence since he wakened in the tower. But what had brought him here? For this was no place one came by chance. Even in the dullness of his thoughts, he began to see that. No other stranger came to these gates. The tower stood aloof and remote, its back turned on the way to Neshum, that was the nearest town. No man came to the keep, none left it. Its windows looked down on desolation. From these windows Ged looked out, as he kept by himself in his high tower room, day after day, dull and heartsick and cold. It was always cold in the tower, for all the carpets and the tapestried hangings and the rich furred clothing and the broad marble fireplaces they had. It was a cold that got into the bone, into the marrow, and would not be dislodged. And in Ged's heart, a cold shame settled also and would not be dislodged, as he thought always how he had faced his enemy and been defeated and had run. In his mind, all the masters of Roke gathered. Gensher, the archmage, frowning in their midst, and Nemerly was with them, and Ogion, and even the witch who had taught him his first spell. All of them gazed at him, and he knew he had failed their trust in him. He would plead, saying, "If I had not run away, the shadow would have possessed me. It had already all of Skior's strength and part of mine, and I could not fight it. It knew my name. I had to run away. A wizard Gebeth would be a terrible power for evil and ruin. I had to run away." But none of those who listened in his mind would answer him, and he would watch the snow falling, thin and ceaseless, on the empty lands below the window, and feel the dull cold grow within him, till it seemed no feeling was left to him except a kind of weariness. So he kept to himself for many days out of sheer misery. When he did come down out of his room, he was silent and stiff. The beauty of the lady of the keep confused his mind, and in this rich, seemly, orderly, strange court, he felt himself to be a goatherd, born and bred. They let him alone when he wanted to be alone, and when he could not stand to think his thoughts and watch the falling snow any longer, often Sarat met with him in one of the curving halls, tapestried and firelit, lower in the tower, and there they would talk. There was no merriment in the lady of the keep. She never laughed, though she often smiled. Yet she could put Ged at ease almost with one smile. With her, he began to forget his stiffness and his shame. Before long, they met every day to talk, long, quietly, idly, a little apart from the serving woman, who always accompanied Sarat, by the fireplace or at the window of the high rooms of the tower. The old lord kept mostly to his own apartments, coming forth mornings to pace up and down the snowy inner courtyards of the castle keep, like an old sorcerer who has been brewing spells all night. When he joined Ged and Sarat for supper, he sat silent, looking up at his young wife sometimes with a hard, covetous glance. Then Ged pitied her. She was like a white deer caged, like a white bird wing clipped, like a silver ring on an old man's finger. She was an item of Benderesque's hoard. When the lord of the keep left them, Ged stayed with her, trying to cheer her solitude as she had cheered his. What is this jewel that gives your keep its name? He asked her as they sat talking over their emptied gold plates and gold goblets in the cavernous candlelit dining hall. You have not heard of it? It is a famous thing. No, I know only that the lords of Osskill have famous treasuries. Ah, this jewel outshines them all. Come, would you like to see it? She smiled with a look of mockery and daring, as if a little afraid of what she did, and led the young man from the hall out through the narrow corridors of the base of the tower and downstairs underground to a locked door he had not seen before. This she unlocked with a silver key, looking up at Ged with that same smile as she did so, as if she dared him to come look on with her. Beyond the door was a short passage and a second door, which she unlocked with a gold key, and beyond that, a third door, which she unlocked with one of the great words of unbinding. Within that last door, her candle showed them a small room, like a dungeon cell. Floor, walls, ceiling, all rough stone, unfurnished, blank. Do you see it? Sarah asked. As Ged looked round the room, his wizard's eye caught one stone of those that made the floor. It was rough and dank as the rest, a heavy, unshapen paving stone, yet he felt the power of it as if it spoke to him aloud, and his breath caught in his throat, and the sickness came over him for a moment. This was the founding stone of the tower. This was the central place. It was cold, bitter cold. Nothing could ever warm the little room. This was a very ancient thing. An old and terrible spirit was prisoned in that block of stone. He did not answer Sarat yes or no, but stood still, and presently, with a quick, curious glance at him, she pointed out the stone. That is the Terranon. Do you wonder that we keep so precious a jewel locked away in our deepest hoard room? Still Ged did not answer, but stood dumb and wary. She might almost have been testing him, but he thought she had no notion of the stone's nature, to speak of it so lightly. She did not know enough of it to fear it. Tell me of its powers, he said at last. It was made before Segoy raised the islands of the world from the open sea. It was made when the world itself was made, and will endure until the end of the world. Time is nothing to it. If you lay your hand upon it and ask a question of it, it will answer, according to the power that is in you. It has a voice, if you know how to listen. It will speak of things that were, and are, and will be. It told of your coming, long before you came to this land. Will you ask a question of it now? No. It will answer you. There is no question I would ask of it. It might tell you, Sarah said in her soft voice, how you will defeat your enemy. Ged stood mute. Do you fear the stone? She asked, as if unbelieving, and he answered, yes. In the deadly cold and silence of the room encircled by wall after wall of spellwork and of stone, in the light of the one candle she held, Sarah glanced at him with gleaming eyes. Sparrowhawk, she said, you are not afraid. But I will not speak with that spirit, Ged replied, looking full at her, spoke with a grave boldness. My lady, that spirit is sealed in a stone and the stone is locked by binding spell and blinding spell and charm of lock and ward and triple fortress walls in a barren land, not because it is precious, but because it can work great evil. Excuse me. I do not know what they told you of it when you came here, but you who are young and gentle-hearted should not never, you who are young and gentle-hearted should never touch the thing or even look on it. It will not work you well. I have touched it. I have spoken to it and heard it speak. It does me no harm. She turned away, and they went out through the doors and passages till the torchlight of the broad stairs of the She turned, and they went out through the doors and passages till in the torchlight of the broad stairs of the tower she blew out her candle. They parted with few words. That night Ged slept little. It was not the thought of the shadow that kept him awake. Rather, that thought was almost driven from his mind by the image, ever returning, of the stone on which this tower was founded, and by the vision of Saret's face, bright and shadowy in the candlelight, turned to him. Again and again he felt her eyes on him and tried to decide what look had come into those eyes when he refused to touch the stone, whether it had been disdain or hurt. Then he lay down to sleep. When he lay down to sleep at last, the silken sheets of the bed were cold as ice, and ever he wakened in the dark, thinking of the stone and of Saret's eyes. Next day he found her in the curving hall of gray marble, lit now by the westering sun, where often she spent the afternoon at games or at the weaving loom with her maids. He said to her, "Lady Saret, I affronted you. I am sorry for it." "No," she said musingly, and again, "No." She sent away the serving women who were with her, and when they were alone, she turned to Ged. "My guest, my friend," she said, "you are very clear-sighted, but perhaps you do not see all that is to be seen. In Gaunt, in Roke, they teach high wizardries, but they do not teach all wizardries. This is Oskill, Ravenland. It is not a Hardic land. Mages do not rule it, nor do they know much of it. There are happenings here not dealt with by the lore masters of the South, and things here not named in the namers' lists. What one does not know, one fears. But you have nothing to fear here in the court of the Terranon. A weaker man would, indeed, not you. You are one born with the power to control that which is in the sealed room. This I know. It is why you are here now." "I do not understand." "That is because my Lord Benderesk has not been wholly frank with you. I will be frank. Come, sit by me here." He sat down beside her on the deep cushioned window ledge. The dying sunlight came level through the window, flooding them with a radiance in which there was no warmth. On the moorlands below, already sinking into shadow, last night's snow lay unmelted, a dull white pall over the earth. She spoke now very softly. "Benderesk is lord and inheritor of the Terranon, but he cannot use the thing. He cannot make it wholly serve his will. Nor can I, alone or with him. Neither he nor I has the skill and power. You have both." "How do you know that?" "From the stone itself. I told you that it spoke of your coming. It knows its master. It has waited for you to come. Before ever you were born, it waited for you, and for the one who could master it. And he who can make the Terranon answer what he asks, and do with it he will, and do what he wills, has power over his own destiny, strength to crush any enemy, mortal or of the other world, foresight, knowledge, wealth, dominion, and a wizardry at his command that could humble the Archmage himself. As much of that, as little of that as you choose, is yours for the taking. Once more she lifted her strange bright eyes to him, and her gaze pierced him so that he trembled as if with cold. Yet there was fear in her face, as if she sought his help but was too proud to ask for it. Ged was bewildered. He put her hand on his as she spoke. She put her... Hold on a sec. I gotta turn a page. Much better. She had put her hand on his as she spoke. Its touch was light. It looked narrow and fair on his dark, strong hand. He said, pleading, Saret, I have no such power as you think. What I once had, I threw away. I cannot help you. I am no use to you. But I know this. The old powers of earth are not for men to use. They were never given into our hands, and in our hands they work only ruin. Ill means, ill end. I was not drawn here, but driven here, and the force that drove me works to my undoing. I cannot help you. He who throws away his power is filled sometimes with a far greater power, she said, smiling, as if his fears and scruples were childish ones. I may know more than you of what brought you here. Did not a man speak to you in the streets of Orome? He was a messenger, a servant of the Terranon. He was a wizard once himself, but he threw away his staff to serve a power greater than any mage's. And you came to Oskil, and on the moors you tried to fight a shadow with your wooden staff. And almost we could not save you, for that thing that follows you is more cunning than we deemed, and had taken much strength from you already. Only shadow can fight shadow. Only darkness can defeat the dark. Listen, Sparrowhawk. What do you need then to defeat the shadow which waits for you outside these walls? I need that which I cannot know, its name. The Terranon that knows all births and deaths and beings before and after death, the unborn and the undying, the bright world and the dark one will tell you that name. And the price? There is no price. I tell you, it will obey you, serve you as your slave. Shaken and tormented, he did not answer. He held his hand now in both of hers, looking into his face. She held his hand now in both of hers, looking into his face. The sun had fallen into the mists that dulled the horizon, and the air too had grown dull. But her face grew bright with praise and triumph as she watched him and saw his will shaken within him. Softly she whispered, You will be mightier than all men, a king among men. You will rule, and I will rule with you. Suddenly Ged stood up, and one step forward took him where he could see, just round the curve of the long room's wall, beside the door, the Lord of the Terranon, who stood listening and smiling a little. Ged's eyes cleared, and his mind. He looked down at Saret. It is light that defeats the dark, he said, stammering. Light. As he spoke, he saw, as plainly as if his own words were the light that showed him, how indeed he had been drawn here, lured here, how they had used his fear to lead him on, and how they would, once they had him, have kept him. They had saved him from the shadow, indeed, for they did not want him to be possessed by the shadow until he had become a slave of the stone. Once his will was captured by the power of the stone, then they would let the shadow into the walls, for a Gebeth was a better slave even than a man. If he had once touched the stone, or spoken to it, he would have been utterly lost. Yet, even as the shadow had not quite been able to catch up with him and seize him, so the stone had not been able to use him, not quite. He had almost yielded, but not quite. He had not consented. It is very hard for evil to take hold of the unconsenting soul. He stood between the two who had yielded, who had consented, looking from one to the other as Benderesk came forward. I told you, the Lord of the Terranon said, dry voice to his lady, that he would slip from your hands, Seret. They are clever fools, your gauntish sorcerers, and you are a fool too, woman of Gaunt, thinking to trick both him and me, and rule us both by your beauty, and use the Terranon to your own ends. But I am the Lord of the Stone, I, and this I do to the disloyal wife. Ekevro, I, Aelwantar. It was a spell of changing, and Benderesk's long hands were raised to shape the cowering woman into some hideous thing, swine or dog or driveling hag. Ged stepped forward and struck the Lord's hands down with his own, saying as he did so only one short word. And though he had no staff and stood on alien ground, an evil ground, the domain of a dark power, yet his will prevailed. Benderesk stood still, his clouded eyes fixed hateful and unseeing upon Seret. Come, she said in a shaking voice. Sparrowhawk, come quick, before he can summon the servants of the stone. As if in echo, a whispering ran through the tower, through the stones of the floor and walls, a dry, trembling murmur, as if the earth itself should speak. Seizing Ged's hand, Seret ran with him through the passages and halls, down the long, twisted stairs. They came out into a courtyard where a last silvery daylight still hung above the soiled, trodden snow. 3 of the castle's servants barred their way, sullen and questioning, as if they had been suspecting some plot of these 2 against their master. It grows dark, lady, one of them said, and another, you cannot ride out now. Out of my way, filth, Seret cried, and spoke in the sibilant Oscillian speech. The man fell back from her and crouched down to the ground, writhing, and one of them screamed aloud. We must go out by the gate. There is no other way out. Can you see it? Can you find it, Sparrowhawk? She tugged at his hand, yet he hesitated. What spell did you set on them? I ran hot lead in the marrow of their bones. They will die of it. Quick, I tell you. He will loose the servants of the stone, and I cannot find the gate. There is a great charm on it. Quick! Ged did not know what she meant, for to him the enchanted gate was as plain to see as the stone archway of the court through which he saw it. He led Seret through the one, across the untrodden snow of the forecourt, and then speaking a word of opening, he led her through the gate of the wall of spells. She changed as soon as they passed through that doorway, out of the silvery twilight of the court of the Terranon. She was not less beautiful in the drear light of the moors, but there was a fierce witch look to her beauty. And Ged knew her at last, the daughter of the Lord of Albi, daughter of a sorceress of Oskill, who had mocked him in the green meadows above Ogion's house long ago, and had sent him to read the spell which loosed the shadow. But he spent small thought on this, for he was looking about him now with every sense alert, looking for that enemy, the shadow which would be waiting for him somewhere outside the magic walls. It might be Gebeth still, cloaked in Skior's death, or it might be hidden in the gathering darkness, waiting to seize him and merge its shapelessness with his living flesh. He sensed its nearness, yet did not see it. But as he looked, he saw some small dark thing, half buried in snow, a few paces from the gate. He stooped, then softly picked it up with his two hands. It was the otak, its fine, short fur all clogged with blood, and its small body light and stiff and cold in his hands. "Change yourself! Change yourself! They are coming!" Sarah shrieked, seizing his arm and pointing to the tower that stood behind them like a tall white tooth in the dusk. From slit windows near its base, dark creatures were creeping forth, flapping long wings, slowly beating and circling up over the walls towards Ged and Seret, where they stood on the hillside, unprotected. The rattling whisper they had heard inside the keep had grown louder, a tremor and moaning in the earth under their feet. Anger welled up in Ged's heart, a hot rage of hate against all the cruel, deathly things that had tricked him, trapped him, hunted him down. "Change yourself!" Sarah screamed at him, and she, with a quick gasp spell, shrank into a gray gull and flew. But Ged stooped and plucked a blade of wild grass that poked up dry and frail out of the snow where the otak had lain dead. This blade he held up now and spoke aloud to it in the true, and as he spoke aloud to it in the true speech, it lengthened and thickened, and when he was done, he held a great staff, a wizard's staff, in his hand. No banefire burned red along it when the black flapping creatures from the court of the Terranon swooped over him, and he struck their wings with it. It blazed only with the white mage fire that does not burn, but drives away the dark. The creatures returned to the attack, botched beasts belonging to ages before bird or dragon or man, long since forgotten by the daylight, but recalled by the ancient, malign, unforgetful power of the stone. They harried Ged, swooping at him. He felt the scythe sweep of their talons about him and sickened in their dead stench. Fiercely, he parried and struck, fighting them off with the fiery staff that was made of his anger and a blade of wild grass. And suddenly they all rose up like ravens frightened from carrion and wheeled away, flapping silently in the direction that Seret in her gull shape had flown. Their vast wings seemed slow, but they flew fast, each downbeat driving them mightily through the air. No gull could long outmatch that heavy speed. Quick, as he had once done at Roke, Ged took the shape of a great hawk, not the sparrow hawk they called him, but the pilgrim falcon that flies like an arrow, like thought. On barred, sharp, strong wings he flew, pursuing his pursuers. The air darkened, and among the clouds, stars shone brightening. Ahead, he saw the black, ragged flock all driving down and in upon one point in midair. Beyond that black clot, the sea lay, pale with the last ashy gleam of day. Straight and swift, the hawk Ged shot towards the creatures of the stone, and they scattered as he came amongst them, as water drops scatter from a cast pebble. But they had caught their prey. Blood was on the beak of this one, and white feathers stuck to the claws of another, and no gull skimmed beyond them over the pallid sea. Already they were turning on Ged again, coming quick and ungainly with iron beaks stretched out agape. He, wheeling once above them, screamed the hawk's scream of defiant rage, and then shot on across the low beaches of Oskel, out over the breakers of the sea. The creatures of the stone circled a while, croaking, and one by one beat back ponderously inland over the moors. The old powers will not cross over the sea, being bound each to an isle, a certain place, cave, or stone, or welling spring. Back went the black emanations to the tower keep, where maybe the lord of the Terranon, Benderesque, wept at their return and maybe laughed. But Ged went on, falcon winged, falcon mad, like an unfalling arrow, like an unforgotten thought, over the Oskel Sea and westward into the wind of winter and the night. That's a heck of a stopping spot.
You have to wait a whole week?
They make these things called books.
Oh. Well, there is that, I guess.
But yes,
I can wait.
I'll not be reading aloud for another week.
Well, thank you for reading aloud tonight.
Yeah, thank you very much.
It was mostly very clear after you changed the devices.
Yeah. Yeah, that made a big difference.